The first book I read this month was Things and A Man Asleep by Georges Perec. Perec is a writer I'm quite familiar with. I've read a lot of his stuff and really enjoyed it, especially Life a User's Manual, which is one of my favorite books. And I've had this on my shelf for a while. I think it's one of the most physically beautiful books that I own. These Godine books are really, really nice. And this cover is really just it's almost like a vision board for like a room I want to create for myself. I really love it. And under the dust cover, it's got this really nice green shade to it as well. This book has 2 novels in it. It's 2 short novels. They're from early in Perec's career. I know Things is often assigned reading in French high schools, or at least it was at one point, as the introduction indicates. Things is a little more traditional. It's about these characters who are sort of interested in material goods that modern society is able to provide, and they want to have this really exuberant young life filled with all the things that time and youth can provide them. These characters, Jerome and Sylvie, they're this young couple, and the way that they approach their lives and the values that they have, it really reminded me of a couple that you would come across in one of the extended party scenes in The Recognitions by William Gaddis. And so their life is this sort of shallow cavalcade of objects, and they decide eventually they want to throw it all away and move to Tunisia. But perhaps most interestingly, and it's indicative of Perec's style, is that the story is sort of told in this detached, like conditional prose style, where everything is like it would be and they would, and it's sort of projecting into the future in a sort of an imaginary, unreal, conditional way, almost as if the items and the things that they want to fill their lives with, they're either ultimately unattainable or they represent something that doesn't quite reflect reality. But this changes rather abruptly at the end of the book, or in the second part. We sort of see what has come of their life as they've moved to Tunisia, and Perec changes the style. Considering how early this came in Perec's career, I believe it may have been his first novel or one of his first. It really shows how deep in his DNA this desire to experiment with form, it really comes from deep within him. The second story, A Man Asleep, is a little bit more transgressive, I suppose. It's about this character who decides to live outside of society in a way similar to a character from Beckett or Bernhard, or even Dostoevsky's Underground Man. He sort of takes it upon himself to become this like existential flaneur, just walking around the city and observing these things, but he's also sort of trapped in his room. He's sort of staring at the objects in his room, and time is sort of condensing into one moment, and this moment is sort of never ending and encapsulating his entire existence. This one also has an interesting choice in being narrated in second person. Everything is you do this and you do that. Really cool stuff. And Perec is great and wonderful. I think you can get this book in the other Godine editions that they have. The what are they called? Yeah, these styles, these Verba Mundi books. You can get the Things and A Man Asleep. I think you can get them in this style as well. Really good book. After that, I read A.B. Warburg and the Image in Motion. This is by Philippe-Alain Michaud, with a foreword by George Didi Huberman, which I don't know if I'm saying that right, but his foreword was really interesting, and I looked him up. He's got some really interesting books too that I'd like to get to if I can find them. Warburg is a really interesting character for me. He's almost this kind of ecstatic scholar. You know, he goes mad, and he gets enchanted by the snake and motion and Native American tribal dances. And a lot of this is the key for Michaud as well. The image of the snake is Warburg's sort of prime image that he uses to describe history. and it's because it physically embodies motion. And Warburg's approach to art history and art theory comes from distinguishing between traditional understandings of Renaissance painting as being about representation of form and sort of the clarity of the image, whereas he believes that the true meaning comes from the depiction of movement and the motion in the image. Warburg also plays with the idea of the spectator being an active participant in the piece of art, in the painting or in the sculpture. To highlight this, Michaud goes through some of Warburg's studies into older paintings, particularly those that use real historical figures as their models. The one he highlights are these images of Maria Portinari, who is the same model used in all of these images. You know, the relationship between her age when she's being depicted here and how she's being represented. Warburg thinks perhaps he has discovered her in a later work, but because he discovered her later, chronologically, it comes later, despite the fact that her physical representation would indicate that she was younger when she posed for this painting. This interplay is really important for Warburg, and it's the motion and the interplay of people and art coming together that it was really, you know, eye-opening for me. Michaud is kind of a film scholar. He sort of uses Warburg as a springboard, and the first chunk of this book doesn't really directly deal with him at all, but it deals with sort of the advent of cinema and sort of the early films that took place in these black box theaters. The sort of the films you would see, these sort of these scenes of people, they would sort of emerge in the film and then disappear into nothingness. There's no mise en scène. There's no world in which they exist. They're just sort of part of this filmic instantiation. There's also this extended sequence where he's describing these sort of intricate stage performances that would be performed in which the stage enters into the sort of floor of the hall, and the audience becomes more of an active participant in watching the performance. This really intricate, multi-layered, really decadent Baroque performance. But of course, for Warburg, the biggest thing is his interest in the snake dances, these Native American rituals, and his tour of America and the things he got to see in these tribes. I had been hoping this book would have a little bit more biographical information about Warburg, which you know, I might have to get another book for that. There are some primary texts from Warburg that are added as appendices, his notes and journals and stuff like that. So that's really valuable as well. And there he is. There's A.B. Warburg. I decided to do a little bit of a reading project after that, where I read Mild Vertigo by Mieko Kanai, which is translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton. And I also had Polly Barton's memoir and her musings on her translation in her time in Japan, 50 Sounds. Mieko Kanai is a Japanese writer who I was, prior to this, unfamiliar with. I'd never read any of her stuff, and I think she's been translated not to quite a high degree, although she's been writing for a long time, and I think she was born in the 40s. Mild Vertigo is about a woman living in modern Japan, or I think late 20th or early 21st century Japan. And what I really like about this book is that a lot of Japanese writing, it's got this really classical register, or this style that is very much steeped in like literary tradition. And so I'm always looking out for Japanese writers who are more interested in breaking the mold or engaging in some sort of formal experimentation. And I wonder how much of this is not shown in English because of difficulties in translation or things like that. Something about what she writes in here about this mother sort of feeling detached from her life and sort of engaged in this meaninglessness of modern Japanese existence. It definitely captured something that I find myself experiencing living in Japan. So I found that really refreshing, actually, and I really enjoyed reading this book. And I'd like to read more from Kanai. And I was really impressed with Barton's translation as well, so I thought it would be a good chance to read both of these together. This is about Barton's time coming to Japan to teach English and her sort of losing herself in the Japanese language, and she divides this book into different sounds, these sort of mimetic onomatopoeia type words that are really a huge part of daily conversation in the Japanese language, and their lack of counterpart in English makes it sort of a tricky spot for a lot of Japanese language learners, learning how to use them and what they mean. And so exploring these feelings and the memories they evoke sort of to create this memoir is really a bit of a win for Polly Barton. I think that's a really great idea. There isn't as much in here as I had wanted there to be about actually translating in and of itself. It's more about her journey and her time coming over here, and her relationships and her sort of coping with the language barrier, and learning about herself as a person by losing herself in another language. When she describes her time as an English teacher, there's a lot of honesty in it, and a lot of it rang really true for me because it reflects a lot of my own experience being a foreigner in Japan teaching English, not necessarily knowing the language as well as I'd like. The fact that Barton is doing this both as a woman and in a much more isolated community than I've ever been a part of, it really heightens the experience, and it sort of it helped me to reflect on my time here, and that was a really valuable thing. Having finished this book, I think I can safely say I'm interested in reading more translations from Barton, and I found a lot of her stuff here in my library that I already have that she's translated. I have my Japanese literary magazines, and I found all of her entries and submissions, and I'm looking forward to revisiting those. So this was, I think, a successful reading project. I jumped from one reading project directly into another, and I found myself in this really wonderful pocket of literature, a pocket that I love to visit and I love to sort of get comfortable in. I read the collected fictions of Borges, which, I mean, what can I say about Borges? Like, it's some of the best there is, I had read the fictions collection before a handful of years ago, and reading those stories again, it was like a brand new experience. I couldn't believe sort of either I had changed so much that I imagined the text to have changed as well. And maybe that's the point a lot of the time. I'm wondering how much Borges is interested in creating a sort of shifting text. One of his biggest influences is the 1001 Nights. There's lots of cowpokes and travelers and lost tomes and conspiracies, and it's just something wonderful to read. Reading this whole collection and getting through to the end of the book, they're arranged chronologically, and I really loved getting to the end of this collection and sort of getting to see Borges as an older man. There are 2 or 3 stories in here in which Borges is engaging in a sort of imaginary meeting between younger and older selves. There's one where he's quite a young man meeting himself when he's older, and then there's one where he's an older man meeting himself as an even older man on the sort of on death's door, as it were, and getting to see the growth of him as a man, as a writer, in these later stories was wonderful. I don't know what else I can say about Borges. If you haven't read any Borges, I mean, pick anything that you can find, get anything you can. This is a desert island book. This is a book that should be read and reread forever. I think we would all become better readers and better people if we all read Borges more. And reading this collection really just opened up this pocket of reading for me. So I knew that when I finished this one, the next book I was going to read was always going to be Borges and the Eternal Orangutans by Luis Fernando Verissimo. And this is kind of a literary detective story. The narrator of the book is someone who it's a literary conference about Poe, about Edgar Allan Poe, and the narrator is a member of this sort of international committee of Poe writers and translators. And originally he had translated a story of Borges's, but he changed the ending to be like more narratively satisfying in his view. Of course, this is a blasphemy, right? The narrator attends this conference and there's this murder, and he ends up meeting Borges in person. And the book is sort of written as a letter to Borges. And it's just a love letter to Borges. It's a love letter to sort of this kind of literature. I couldn't believe how fun it was. This book is one of the most fun reading experiences I've had in a long time. Translated by Margaret Joel Costa, who does a lot of great stuff translating from Portuguese. She's also done the Fernando Pessoa that I've read. It plays out almost like an extended Borges story, and there are references to his stories. There are references to his works and the things he writes about in his stories. This is so much fun, and if you're a fan of Borges, this is something you really need to pick up. I couldn't believe how much fun I had when I was reading it. The next book that I sort of followed on this trajectory was Religio, Medici, and Urne-Burial by Sir Thomas Browne. This book is a total trip. It's really far out. The writing is so unique and strange and beautiful. The first part here, the Religio Medici, is sort of a Thomas Browne was a doctor, a medical doctor, who was interested in anatomy and the sort of physical body. At the time he was writing in the 17th century, this sort of conflicts with religion, which is so prevalent and important at the time. And being a devout Christian man, how can you reconcile all of these things? Being a doctor and being a Christian. And Urne-Burial is about the uncovering of these urns that belong to like an Anglo-Saxon tribe that they were discovered in the 17th century, and it becomes a point of embarkation for Thomas Browne to think about our bodies and what happens when we die and remains, and what remains and what goes on. Ultimately, how are we to make sense of life and make sense of our experience when countless things are lost. And there's a quote in here about how many forgotten great men there are, these men that were so great and nothing of them remains. The sort of selling point of these essays is the writing. Thomas Browne is really a sort of an expert at this really eclectic and again ecstatic prose, really punchy stuff. It's the style is quite antiquated in parts, and the spelling is as well, kind of Shakespearean. You can imagine kind of like Shakespeare, but the sentences he's able to construct and the arguments he's able to make, which by and large contradict each other regularly. He's not really interested in proving a point or laying out a clear argument. He's much more interested in exploring the spaces, the ideas, and what sort of whatever train of thought comes to him. He really wants to explore that in the most artistic and ecstatic prose possible. I thought the first half of Religio Medici was a little dry, but the second half was wonderful, and Urne-Burial was like perfect. I had wanted to read this one for a long time too, and it fits in with Borges. Borges references Browne quite a bit, and so I thought it would be a nice time to read Thomas Browne. All of this together, all of this culminated with finally getting to Sebald, The Rings of Saturn. W.G. Sebald is a writer I love. I really love his books, and I love the place they put me mentally and spiritually. They sort of like realign my sort of inner self, like something in my interior. I can feel it being corrected by these books. All of his stuff has this really strong effect on me, physically and mentally, I suppose. In this book, Sebald, or a narrator who is a sort of representation of Sebald, goes on a walk in the British countryside, and as he's walking to all these places, memories come to him, and again, similar to Thomas Browne, he explores them to their fullest. One of the prime memories in the beginning of the book being his experience of reading Thomas Browne and his theories about Thomas Browne maybe being in attendance at a very famous dissection, which was painted by Rembrandt, and this anatomy lesson portrait. That would be this one here. And he goes into descriptions about Browne's theory of the quincunx, this shape here that he finds in nature everywhere. And so this is where all of these books sort of commingle and overlap. This book, it really captivated me and took me away somewhere really special. In a way, it's a book of consecutive and extended digressions. There isn't really a clear point, but all of the stories and all of the history and pseudo-history, he sort of mixes fact and fiction to create this higher literary piece. Everything is, again, similar to Browne. It is used to show this sort of onslaught of time and the fact that whatever is created eventually leaves. It's hard to imagine what once had been, and so Sebald really likes to look at these old houses and forgotten villages and flesh out these details and this old tower that had sunk into the sand, and why, and who built the bridge, and how is it connected to the Chinese Empire and stuff like that. It's a wonderful meditation on life and death and the human experience. This is, in my opinion, it's Sebald at his best. This is like the ultimate form of everything that I've read. Everything of his that I've read, it all comes together in this sort of perfect form here. I loved this book so much. I already want to read it again. It's one of the greats. This is a modern classic. Everyone should read The Rings of Saturn. I followed that with The Life of Tufu by Eliot Weinberger. I read a lot of new directions this month. I wonder if I needed some sort of reassurance that I was going to be reading something I knew I would like. Lots of new directions this month. Weinberger is a scholar and a translator. He's done a lot of work with, I think, Spanish as well as Chinese poetry. And this, if I'm not mistaken, was a bit of a pandemic project for him. Tufu, the legendary Chinese poet, who here lived 712 to 770. These are not poems of Tufu, and they are not like extracts or translations. It is an attempt at a sort of autobiography in a style reminiscent of Tufu, and especially his life dealing with war. He was living in a time of war, and the people in his life leave, and he's sort of witnessing poverty in the streets, and young men are leaving and not returning. But it uses the language and the imagery that you would see in his poetry. This is a really brief book, maybe 60 pages, and these short poems. I read this book twice in a day, and it's really lovely. And some of the images that Weinberger lands on are really, really strong. Throughout the book, there's this sort of reappearing image of someone who Tufu is hoping to meet again after a long time. They saw each other, and it's been so long, and he's thinking of this person, and modern times being what they are, they might not see each other again, and when they do, how drastically might things change? How would the other person change? How would Tufu have changed at that point? But in really sharp, beautiful, poetic images, kind of like prose poems, or kind of like I don't know what you would call these. There are no men left, they're conscripting boys. The chubby ones have mothers saying goodbye. The thin ones just look forlorn. Everyone has cousins who died in the war. I remember when we were kids, you were better than me at counting coins. Really great. I really like this stuff. After that, I read Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. This is my first book by Coetzee, my first time reading him. And I really wanted to like, I had a lot of momentum going, and I really just wanted to like push on and get through this one, because I really hate this cover. I really dislike it, and I hate this physical book. It's like sharp in my hands, and I don't know, something about it. I dislike it, but I got it for a really good price out here, and I wanted to read it and hopefully, open up Coetzee's work to me so I could enjoy it more, and then I'll send this copy off and get a keeper copy if I liked it. And I did. I really liked this book, and I want to get a copy. I want to keep instead of having to look at this quite dreary cover. This book's about a sort of literary Lothario type man who is in his 50s, and he has an affair with one of his students at the university, and the fallout from this affair leaves him to resign his position and move to the South African countryside, and live on a farm with his daughter, his somewhat estranged daughter. Like, the marriage fell apart, and the relationship is a little bit fraught. The daughter calls him by his first name. I don't know what I was expecting. For some reason, I thought this book was going to be a little bit more scandalous. These sort of like shock factor feelings of the disgrace, right? But it's really quite cerebral, and really it's not interested in making the reader feel any sort of shame or any sort of vicarious shame. It's really a great piece of writing. I was actually surprised at how much I liked it. I really found myself liking it by, especially halfway through the book. There's I don't know if it's a twist or what. I think it's alluded to on the back of the book, but I had, if I had read that, I sort of didn't remember it, or I didn't see it coming. But there's a huge shock like halfway through the book. It changes the trajectory of this man David and his daughter Lucy, like their lives and their relationship. It totally shifts, and I had this big like holy moly moment when I was reading on the train. I had to stop and be like, what the hell just happened? There's a lot of really good stuff in here. I think Coetzee's really smart. Obviously he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I think this book was sort of a key piece of that honor. Like, this really did a lot for him. There's a lot in here, a lot about literature, and a lot about family, and a lot about race relations and living in post-apartheid South Africa. And he does a really good job of not sort of dumping all of this exposition on the reader about the political place and time of what's happening. He makes sure to sort of filter it in throughout the book, so that if you're unfamiliar with the country and its politics, by the end of it, you definitely have at least a good enough understanding of what happened and what has happened, that the emotional weight of the story, it sort of clicks. It's disgraceful. Like, there's a lot of disgrace within the book, and the arc of the main character, the arc of David Lurie, is really profound. and I found myself really enjoying it despite the sort of sadness and bleakness of the situation. I thought, again, it was another honest book. I think this book has a lot of honesty in it, and I'd like to read more from Coetzee. The last book I read was A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. I was working in a bookstore when this came out, and it sort of became this big thing. You know, I'd sort of heard really good things about it, and people who didn't ordinarily read were recommending this book, and it seemed to be about a place in the time that I was interested in. A gentleman living in Russia, this sort of Grand Budapest Hotel type vibe, and Russian literature, and the sort of the changing of the regimes in the 20s. It had a lot of like aesthetic and intellectual bits that were appealing to me. So I thought I'd give it a go, and I found a good copy out here. But I didn't really like this book that much. It's strange that, you know, I've been making videos for like, you know, almost a year and a half now, and I haven't read too many books in that time that I found myself disliking. But I think it's true that it's maybe easier for me to talk about books that I have issues with, or books that I dislike. You know, something like Borges. Like, Borges is wonderful and perfect, and you know, what else am I meant to say about Borges that hasn't already been said by people who are infinitely more qualified? So I find myself having a lot to say about A Gentleman in Moscow because I didn't like it. But I don't want to make like a 20-minute video talking about A Gentleman in Moscow, so I'm going to make it brief. This book is far too precious, and this book is kitsch. This book, it is pure fantasy fairy tale stuff. The main character, Alexander, is sort of an intellectual Ubermensch. He's like he's Jeeves, but with the political station of Bertie. He meets not one but two remarkably intelligent young girls. I mean, under 10 years old young girls who are both, you know, intellectually advanced enough and are able to espouse like some sort of knowledge and insight that perfectly matches his character and will allow him to grow and develop, right? And they are somehow preternaturally poignant, like these just genius girls who are perfectly poignant in what they say and how they act. I found it difficult to suspend my disbelief that it happened once, let alone twice. I get the feeling that Towles was writing this book imagining it to be a movie, and I think they turned it into a movie or a TV show. Like, he engages in prose that is fine, but he styles the writing so that it feels like there's always some sort of like momentum and payoff, like this continual payoff and payoff and payoff. He relays an event and then backtracks so you can see how it got there, and everything works out perfectly. He plants things in the first chapter that are foreshadowed and referred to at the end, and it's this like really like, again, really like precious, charming thing. I looked it up, and this book came out in September of 2016, and obviously that's right before like this huge change in culture and politics across the world, and especially in America. This book offers something, an escape, and a sort of an optimism and a clarity of vision that it was totally possible, you know, 10 years ago. But in hindsight, it looks totally trite and narrow-minded and not satisfying. I think Towles is really smart. I think he's a smart guy, and I can admit that the characters in here are pretty memorable, and I enjoyed the sort of ending section where the Count is finally leaving the hotel. I enjoyed that part, and I enjoyed seeing sort of the destinations of these characters, but yeah, like, not, you know, I thought it was fine. I guess I thought it was fine, and maybe I'm nitpicking, but that was all. that was all. A Gentleman in Moscow. That was the last book I read in April.